Hi guys, welcome back to Facebook Live. I'm Harry, joined by Duck as always.
Hello folks.
Duck, Tuesday,
yes.
Why are we here?
We normally do Facebook Lives on Thursday or Friday. This week I am off tomorrow on the majestic superfast Eurostar to Belgium, where I'll be speaking at the Sophos Day Belgium, talking about 30 years of ransomware. That's a whole nother story compared to what we're going to talk about today, which isn't about ransomware, although it's the kind of security hole that could lead to ransomware if you're not careful.
Yeah, cool. As always, please leave your questions in the comments below.
Yes.
And if not, just say hello if you don't have any questions. And if we don't get round to answering them live, we will do it after we finish our live stream.
We will certainly
try. We will try. So we've actually going to be talking about Bluekeep once again.
Yes.
An idea that was originally patched back in May 2019. We're mid-November and we're talking about it once again.
Yes.
So I'll just read out a quick little description. It's a bit jargon heavy, so I do apologise. But we'll just give you a brief overview of kind of what Bluekeep is.
Yeah, this is not a description that you will read. It's one that we put together that kind of, it's sort of in the style that many technical publications use.
Yeah.
And it's meant to be meaningful, and then we'll deconstruct it.
And then
so
we'll deconstruct
you can kind of read into the jargon-heavy stuff you may have heard in the past.
Yeah.
So Hazza, fire away.
There we go. So Bluekeep is a security flaw in Windows RDP that actually gives attackers unattended and unauthenticated remote code execution. The flaw is actually considered wormable, but there is workable exploits that are actually being publicly available and actually currently used on these kind of active attacks. So that's a lot of words in one sentence. They're a bit long, but we'll try and deconstruct this kind of as we go. So we'll just start with what is remote code execution.
Yeah, the jargon that you heard, that's what you'll often see in summaries, and it kind of assumes that everyone knows what all that means. So we didn't mean to leave you with that description. What we want to do is to say, that's what you see, let's take it apart.
Yeah.
Even if you know what it means, we'll try and explain in a way that if you need to explain it to the next guy, you can, like particularly if you need to explain it to your mum or to your friends, your family, your boss or whatever.
Yeah.
So remote code execution is the key part. What that means is someone who isn't on your computer already, someone from outside your network, outside your computer, next to you in the coffee shop, who doesn't already have malware on your computer, can basically trick your computer into sidestepping some kind of security that you have in place and run a program that the other guy chooses. In other words, it basically, imagine that you're at your computer and you get an email and you open the email and there's attachment and you open the attachment, it says, click here to run me, and you know you shouldn't, and you click run me. The idea of remote code execution is the crooks get to that point without actually needing you to receive an email first. So they get into your computer and then they decide what to do from outside. So clearly, remote code execution, or RCE, that is generally speaking the worst sort of security hole, because it means that someone outside can tell your computer what to do without you getting any say-so. So when you see remote code execution, that means your eyes should open up and you go, wow, that's important.
Yeah. Definitely.
Not that other patches are unimportant.
I was going to say.
That's the clear and present danger, because it could happen even if you don't do anything, even if you just got your computer turned on while you go to bed.
Yeah, cool. So when it says it's about like unattained and unauthenticated, what does that actually mean, basically?
Well, particularly, there are two main sorts of remote code execution. There's remote code execution where you still need to help the crooks along, for example, by having a weak password that they have to guess, or by kind of inviting them in the first place. The idea of unauthenticated remote code execution is that, for example, that they connect, as in this case, they connect to a service that is supposed to pop up a login screen, and if the bug is in the login screen itself, so to speak, then they skip over that part, so they don't even need a username or a password. They don't have to sign up for a service first. So you get remote code execution, for example, where you go to a website, and as long as you're already a paid-up user of the website, you've got a username and password, then you can do more than you should. But in this case, just going to the login screen, you actually exploit the security hole at the login screen itself. So unauthenticated remote code execution means the crook doesn't even need your password. They just need to know how to find your computer on the internet.
Yeah, shocking. So we've also just got a hello, Duck from Pennsylvania, Andy.
Hello, Andy.
Say Andy in the live stream. Okay, cool. So the real quick, like, what is RDP? What does it stand for?
Right,
What's it all about?
That's the big thing about Bluekeep, is that obviously we've had, in the past, we've had remote code execution holes in things like Microsoft Office, in Internet Explorer, in Microsoft Edge, in Google Chrome, all of, lots of programs that people are used to. RDP is a little bit different. It's short for Remote Desktop Protocol, and it is the main mechanism on Windows by which you allow somebody else from another computer to log into your computer as if they were sitting at your screen. So it's basically remote login, and it's just called Remote Desktop Protocol, because as you know, on Windows, unlike with Unix or mainframe systems, you're generally not working at a command line, so you're not logging in terminal style. And by remote desktop, it means you don't just get a command window where you can type commands, you actually get the same sort of Windows desktop wallpaper, taskbar, start menu, icons and everything that you would if you were sitting at the computer. In fact, two people can be logged in at the same time, or the other person could be logged in remotely while you're not there.
Well, yeah. Okay, so when it says about like workable exploits, these are things that are actually publicly available. What are they, and what's the difference between exploits and vulnerabilities? Are they the same?
You'll often read about, the number of vulnerabilities in this product or that product or the other product increased enormously this year. So, the number of vulnerabilities has gone up. Vulnerability just means a bug in software that actually undermines security in some way. And fortunately, there's often a very big gap between a vulnerability and an exploit. And an exploit is where a crook or somebody figures out how to abuse a software hole, a vulnerability, in a way that they can actively take advantage of it.
Okay.
Now, the problem with Bluekeep is there are workable public exploits available that means that pretty much anybody can go and download an attack tool which will let them break into a computer, at least in theory, that has this security hole unpatched.
Okay.
So all vulnerabilities do need patching, because that's where somebody has figured out, wow, this isn't supposed to happen. There's a flaw in this program, maybe I can make it crash, or maybe it misbehaves, or this program is definitely incorrectly written. Fortunately, not all vulnerabilities can be turned into workable security holes, although who knows, with enough time somebody might figure out why. That's why we always want to patch vulnerabilities, but if they are already exploitable and workable exploits are already out in the wild, publicly available, that kind of means that any crook who really wants to can go out and get the attack tool and start attacking you if you haven't patched. So when you read something about workable exploits in the wild, then take double notice. Not that you ignore patches if they're just in the vulnerability stage, but when there is a workable exploit, it means kind of you're the low-hanging fruit if you haven't patched. You're probably going to be you're at much greater risk.
Yeah, definitely. As always, Teresa said hello.
Hi, Teresa.
Once again.
One fan?
Number one fan. It says the little top fan as well in the in the live stream. So I think one of the biggest kind of standout points of that whole little sentence is wormable. What does that actually mean? Is it better? Is it worse?
The business about wormability has been, you'll read in the news that this is the big deal about this exploit or this security hole over many others is that not just does the exploit work, it could also be used for a worm. And a worm or a computer virus is basically an attack, a threat, an attack that can spread by itself. So in other words, if a crook wanted to attack 1,000 computers, they wouldn't have to attack one, then two, then three, then four. They could attack the first one and program it to attack the second, and the second could attack the third, the fourth, and the fifth at the same time, and those could attack another 10, and those 10 could attack another 10 each, and so on and so on. So the issue with wormable exploits, where you don't just get the other computer to run something, you get it to run code that then spreads itself to the next guy, is clearly that it could, in theory, spread much further and much faster than a non-wormable exploit. Now, my opinion is, firstly, that most remote code execution exploits must be considered wormable. If I can get into your computer and run a program of my choice, then that program of my choice could be take the program of my choice and copy it to the next guy's computer. So in theory, most remote code execution holes could be used for a worm. I think the issue here is because you don't need a username, because you don't need a password, because you can just send a network packet and kind of poke a stick at the computer, and then you could get that computer to do that to the next and the next and the next, like happened with Code Red back in 2001, or the SQL Slammer worm that many people may remember from 2003. That kind of worm, where it's almost as though it's sort of glancing off computers that it passes, those can spread very, very, very fast. So that was meant to be a wake-up call that made this worse. The problem is that crooks don't really need worms or viruses these days. If you want to attack it, if you've got a list of 1,000 computers on the internet, say by IP number, and you want to attack them one by one, it's pretty easy these days to write a script that just blasts out network packets over the cloud from your computer to 1,000 computers at the same time. You don't need a virus or a worm like you did in the old days. And we know that's the case because crooks have kind of given up on worms and viruses for that reason. They're more complicated to program, they're more likely to go wrong, they're more likely to get noticed, and most of the attacks we get these days, the crooks just send one copy of whatever the attack they want to a million people, rather than send it to one person and let that person send it to the other 99999.
And it's kind of like what we saw then, I guess, with like the phishing emails and things of picking the network provider. They have like a 1 in 4 chance that they can just kind of mass produce stuff like that as such, just like the chance kind of aspect.
In other words, you can have what seems like a targeted attack that isn't a targeted attack, because the crooks are assuming that the people who treat it as a non-targeted attack will simply ignore it. So clearly, if you have a vulnerability for which a workable exploit exists, if that workable exploit is already being used in wormy style, then you definitely have a clear and present danger, and whatever threat exists is probably spreading fast and furiously. So that's the bad side of something that's wormable or can be turned into an automatically self-spreading virus, where the user doesn't need to do anything at all. On the other hand, the fact that you have an exploit that can't be turned into a virus or a worm doesn't mean that you don't need to worry about it. Like you said, it's pretty easy for a crook these days to get enough network bandwidth to try and hit a million people one at a time. The old days, you couldn't assume that people were online. You couldn't assume that they had any internet connectivity or any kind of a modem or anything at all. And that's why in the early days, up to about the year 2000, most threats were viruses, because they relied, once they were on your computer, they wanted to get a foothold, and hopefully then they might be able to spread to the next one and the next one and the next one. The point is, once the crooks are inside your network, they don't need a worm to spread around. They can use, if they're able to get administrator powers inside your network, they can map out your network just like your IT department could. So they don't need to set an automated tool to go and find your network. They can just sit on one beachhead inside the network, find out what's going on, and then attack at once. And the reason we know that is if you look at modern ransomware attacks where a whole network gets frozen at one go, and then the crooks say, hey, it's not $300 anymore, it's not $1,000, it's $100,000 you have to pay. Generally, once they're inside your network, they're not using a worm or a virus to dump the ransomware onto 1,000 computers in your network. They just find out that list of 1,000 computers, and then they write a script that places it on all of them and runs it quickly. And typically, that only takes a few minutes. So wormability, it's a little bit of a red herring, or a blue herring perhaps in this case. It would be much worse if you could easily turn this into a worm. But the point is, it means that in theory, if you haven't patched and you haven't got your security right, someone could walk into your computer, and once they're on your computer, if they're inside your company's network, then, well, they're inside. So they're kind of already halfway to their target of taking over your whole network. Worm or no worm.
Exactly. And Andy was saying as well about like lateral infections, basically, is what we've been saying.
Yes, and you hear a lot about this lateral movement. I don't know why we call it lateral movement. Movement will do to me. What it means is that the crooks get into your network, and if they can get onto one computer, if a system administrator could sit on one computer and log into another, and from that computer could log into a third, then crooks can do exactly the same. And actually, they may not need to log in to one computer and actually jump to the next and jump to the next. If they're on a computer that can actually make a list of all the computers on the network and find where they are, then they may be able, from that beachhead, with something like a ransomware attack, they may be able to copy their file to all the other computers and then just say, at 2 in the morning, when 2 in the morning ticks over, run this file on all the computers. So they never actually need to log into them. They just need to log into one of them to get the attack started.
Exactly. Teresa's just asked as well, so if you've applied updates patched to all systems, PCs and servers, then you're okay?
Well, Yes, in fact, that's great because it's jumped ahead to a
jumping
question
across,
we were
isn't
going
it?
to cover. The important thing in this case, this thing was patched in May. So if you're still vulnerable to the Bluekeep attack now, you actually have more than a double problem. You've got the problem that the fact that this widespread attack that's got the interest of lots of people, and they've got people working on improving the quality of the attack. I don't know quite why you'd want to do that, but we're promised that the exploit's going to be improved this week for anyone who wants it.
Yeah.
The problem is if you haven't patched against Bluekeep, then you are kind of low-hanging fruit. But the real problem is if you haven't patched against Bluekeep, because as Teresa says, if you've got all your patches, if you go to check updates and you see you're bang up to date, then at least in theory, you can't get this month's update without having last month's and the month before and so on. That's the way Microsoft does it these days. Mm-hmm. Their updates are generally roll-ups or cumulative. So if you go there and it says you've got everything, you oughtn't to have missed any from the past.
Course, yeah.
So that means if you're still vulnerable to Bluekeep, it means not only did you miss May, you also missed, I hope I get the months in the right order, you missed June, July, August, September and October as well.
That is correct.
So you've got another, good, I know when we were practicing earlier, I somehow got April in there.
April.
So that's the real problem. If you're still vulnerable to Bluekeep, you've got another 5 months worth of updates that you haven't applied, and if you had applied any of those, you would have been patched against Bluekeep. So the message here is if it takes the Bluekeep story, which is going round and round and round in the media, if it takes the fear of a worm, if it takes the fear of this remote code execution, if it takes that to get you patching, then treat that as a silver lining. If you haven't had a Bluekeep attack yet, then be aware that if it could succeed against you, then a load of other attacks from 5 other further months of security vulnerabilities might succeed as well.
Okay.
So patch early, patch often is the underlying message out of all of this.
Cool. Right. I'm just a bit curious for time because we're approaching 20 minutes. So we've had a few questions actually just from readers and listeners in general as well. So is RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, the same as Windows Remote Assistance?
Yes, that's something that people at home have asked. They've heard about RDP, Remote Desktop, which, as I said, it lets someone log in and they see their own wallpaper, and as if they were sitting at your computer, except they're at theirs. So they've got a little remote window on your computer. Now, remote assistance is slightly different. Mm-hmm. They're on the same security dialog in the Windows control panel, but remote assistance is where you invite a third party, somebody outside, and you have to do this each and every time. You invite someone, if you like, to join in on your computer, and either they can move the mouse or you can move the mouse. And the idea is they're showing you or teaching you how to do something.
Okay.
So remote desktop, if you've got that, if you've ever used remote assistance, that's not the same as RDP. And by default, even with Windows 7, which, by the way, Windows 10 is not affected by this Bluekeep hole, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be checking for patches. But remote assistance, you have to invite someone to do that each and every time.
Yeah.
But it is a separate sort of risk because that is the trick that these tech support scammers use. They don't put malware on your computer. They trick you into inviting them onto your computer, and then they can go and find things and pretend that, wow, there's all sorts of trouble and you better pay them money. Yeah. And there you're inviting them in deliberately. So RDP and remote assistance are not the same. They're in the same part of the control panel. If you're worried, then go to your search bar on Windows and search for remote access, and you should get to the page that lets you configure remote assistance and RDP remote desktop. Make sure remote desktop is turned off. And you can actually turn remote assistance off as well, which means then if you try and invite anyone by mistake, thoughtlessly, then it'll say, actually, you need to go into settings and enable this feature before you can invite anyone. So it's like putting a speed bump in your way. That's a good idea. That's how I do it. Definitely. So that then you can't just go, oh, yeah, I'll click that button because someone said so. Yeah. It makes you stop, think, connect.
Stop, think. Good. So a lot of articles are saying use NLA, which is an extra security. What does that actually mean, and is it specific to the actual Bluekeep bug?
It's not specific to Bluekeep. It is basically specific to RDP. So RDP, when you connect to the RDP service on somebody's computer where it's turned on, and in a lot of company networks, everybody will have it on because it's great for sysadmins. And years ago, long before the Bluekeep vulnerability came along, Microsoft realized this was a bit, that having everybody having RDP on and having anybody able to connect to a computer, particularly a server, and provoke a login screen anytime they wanted, at best, that means that somebody could actually go and keep saying, I want to log in, and try to log in, get the login box, and waste performance on the server. It also means if somebody's picked a weak password on an individual computer, then the crooks are that much closer to being able to guess their way in. So NLA is a thing called network level authentication, and that's a second layer of username and password. It's not quite like 2FA, but it's the same sort of idea. If a computer's running remote desktop protocol but also has NLA enabled, which is the default on recent versions of Windows, and you can go and check the same place that you turn RDP on and off in Control Panel, what that means is you can't actually get to the RDP login screen until you essentially authenticate at the network layer first. And the good news for Bluekeep is that means that the hole where the vulnerability is that you poke the exploit stick into isn't open until you've put in a username and password. So that turns an unauthenticated remote code execution into authenticated remote code execution. You have to log in first. So that's an extra shield, and you should use it even in a world without Bluekeep, because it just keeps the crook. It's very, very little extra inconvenience for you. It just says, okay, you want to RDP to that guy's computer? Well, you have to authenticate to the network first. Okay, you're in. Now you can try and log into the computer. So it's a step that just it just means that you kind of have to declare your intentions and authenticate yourself earlier in the process for the greater good of all. So that's what NLA is all about, and why you will see it referenced in lots of articles on RDP in general and Bluekeep in particular.
There we go. Perfect. Okay, I think that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. But if we haven't actually answered your comments or questions live, we will definitely get around to doing that later.
Patch early, patch often. That's the
I was going to actually say that.
This, right?
Patch early,
there
patch
shouldn't
often.
be an issue. And even if you patched against Bluekeep, that's just make that the beginning of the rest of your life where you stay patched.
Stay patched. Stay secure. So.
Bye, folks.
Bye. See you later.